career in insurance sales. I moved to Ottawa and I cut my teeth, I would say, selling in the startup world, technology startups. So I would consider my first real career job in terms of me wanting to stay in sales for a long time and lead sales was with a small privately funded startup company called PS Software at the time, and we did records management software. This is well before the days of SaaS. I can tell you that. Client server software. But we were an Ottawa-based company. When I joined, we were 3 sales reps, I think. We were selling to large organizations. Most of our clients were US-based, heavily regulated. Microsoft was an early client of ours, Exxon, because we had software that managed file rooms, and those 2 companies had urgent file room needs because we were selling to them around the time that the DOJ, the Department of Justice, was coming in and demanding files for the Exxon Valdez. If you remember the Microsoft, some of their antitrust, anti-competition trials. So I tell you that because I cut my teeth having to learn how to sell in an environment where we didn't have gobs of cash, right? Like, I mean, my boss, the owners of the company, said, like, you're not traveling until we know that it's a really good qualified lead, because I can't just pay you. This was his words, not mine. He was British. I'm not paying you to go to Houston to have tea with somebody, right? So we had to do a lot of selling remotely on the phone well before there was all the tools that we have available to us. And after we got acquired, we were acquired by OpenText out of Kitchener-Waterloo. I left and started to work for other small software companies in Ottawa, because what I discovered is that rather than being a big, cog in a wheel, I really enjoyed growing sales teams. And so I spent my time in Ottawa working for some other startups, giving advice. I eventually became a consultant because there were just too many small companies that didn't need me full time. And as a result, my business sort of morphed into other areas. Since then, I've gone on to work with large and small companies in manufacturing, agriculture, financial services. I still do a lot of work in the software space, both large and small companies. And so I have a broad perspective on what is working globally and locally in both big and small companies. And my goal today is to try to drive down some of that information into key things that you guys need in order to build a scalable sales model. I recognize that you're all in very different businesses, right? We've got SaaS, and we've got, a competitor, a disruptor in the dental denture market, right? So I love this. We've got pet food, and we have software. And you're all at different stages in terms of acquiring customers. So hopefully we can try to use some of these examples to bring it all together. Any questions that you have, either raise your hand or shout them out, or I do have the chat open here as well. And so you're welcome to just text the questions to me as we go. First thing that I want to talk about are the metrics. I see far too often founders, salespeople, and sales VPs getting caught up in not understanding the 4 key metrics that drive your business. You can build your entire sales model based on understanding these 4 things. And when we do the math and we end up with sales velocity, this can drive all of your pipeline building activities. It's what's going to drive ultimately you understanding what the future health of your business is and where you need to focus. And truly, from a sales perspective, no other metrics matter. And it doesn't matter whether you got CRM or whether you have to use an Excel spreadsheet to track this. What we really want to know here are the number of opportunities in the pipeline. So how many opportunities do you have in the pipeline? Multiply that by the average sale. So what does an average first-time customer buy from you? $1,000, $10,000, $100,000. For those of you that are SaaS, use your annual contract value if that's what you're managing your ARR, if you want to call it that. So you're at that average first year value. We're going to multiply that by the win rate. Now, you might not know what the win rate is. 30% is average for a business that's running. I would suggest that you might use 20%, simply because it's going to take, it probably takes a little bit more digging around. You might get more no's in the early stages. And then we're going to divide that whole thing by the length of the sales cycle. Now, I know we'll put these numbers together for you at the end. The length of your sales cycle, again, right now is probably longer than you'd like it to be. And so let's be realistic. You know, if it's 90 days, 60 days, 120 days, I mean, maybe the best number to use here is 6 months, simply because we are doing more of a, you know, cradle to grave, right? Like really having to identify. But the reason this number becomes really important for you to start tracking, no matter how small your metrics are today, is because when you do this calculation, you end up with what's called sales velocity. Sales velocity is the number that if your pipeline stayed exactly the way it is right now for the rest of the year, this is the daily value of your sales pipeline. So whether if the number is 500 or 1,000 or 10,000, that's the number that your current state, your current pipeline is producing for you on any given day. And so that's going to tell you, multiply that by, you know, the number of days in the year. And we say, do we have enough or not enough? And what's the problem? And so then we can start to look at filling each of these buckets. Now, for most of you, it's the number of opportunities that you need, right? I think you're probably looking at this and saying, I just got to find the opportunities. Many of you have your target markets defined, some of you don't. And so we'll spend the majority of today focused on this first metric. But I wanted to share this with you because some of you have more sophisticated revenue engines already. Some of you already have, you know, 10 plus, 20 plus, hundreds of opportunities. And so if you're in that position with your pipeline, it's really important that you start paying attention to all of these other metrics so that you can figure out ways to improve them and build a sustainable sales model. Okay, so let's look at this first one, because this, I think, is where most of you, when I sent out the little survey, and you guys, those of you that filled it out, the majority of you said that working on building opportunities and qualifying those was the most critical thing. We have a question.
Hi. Colleen, the previous slide, just to understand, so you mentioned about the sales velocity.
Yes.
And it is, so it's the current pipeline that's producing is it a daily metric, like at any given day, did you say?
Exactly. So what it tells you, it's an interesting metric because you're going to come up with a number. And after the break, I can also bring up a spreadsheet to show you. But, you know, the number is often, you know, 632. And what that's saying is based on your pipeline health currently, that's how much money your pipeline is bringing into your business every single day. And so what my clients do is they take that and they'll multiply it by the remaining days in the year, or by, you know, 365, just as a run rate, and say, is the pipeline big enough? Is it healthy enough in order for me to hit my goal? There are, you know, I mean, a lot of people will simply say, well, you need 3 times or 5 times the number of opportunities. And that's a simple way to do this. But what I like about this metric for you is it adds a little bit of nuance, because it may be that you have thousands of opportunities, but you can't get them closed because your close ratio is too small. So it gives you a way to play with the metrics depending on the level of advancement of your sales pipeline and your business.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So let's talk about increasing the quantity of opportunities. I mean, ultimately, all sales starts with prospecting, right? And so we need a flow of leads, whether they're coming to us or we're making cold outreach to them. The general rule of thumb for those of you who are just getting started at this is that you want a pipeline of somewhere between 3 to 5 times your goal. So what that means is if you have a goal to close $100,000 in revenue this year, you'd need to have a pipeline somewhere between 300 and 500,000 in order for you to hit that. That's a general rule. It's one that if you do nothing else as a result of getting your sales model started, that would be the one thing. Because the thing that I find most sales people and founders get wrong in the early stages is that they dramatically underestimate how many prospects you need in order to close a piece of business. And even the best producing, most mature sales teams in markets where they are household names are not going to close 100% of the business. So when I look at, my mature markets, I'm working with an identity services group inside MasterCard, right? Everybody knows who MasterCard is. So they don't have any trouble opening doors, right? Everybody picks up the phone when MasterCard is calling. But they're still only closing somewhere between 25 and 40% of the qualified opportunities. So in an environment like that, even, you have to use this 3 to 5. So in your cases where people might not know who you are, you might be solving problems for them that they didn't even know that, there were solutions for. You've got to really estimate on that high side. And it's also important for you guys to recognize that it's going to take you as long to build a healthy pipeline as it is for you to get those deals closed. So if you said to me, Colleen, by the time someone raises their hand and says, this is really interesting, I'd like to learn more, I'm serious about, having another meeting with you. From that point to close, let's say that point was 3 months, it's going to also take you about 3 months to build this pipeline of high quality qualified opportunities. So again, don't underestimate the amount of time and the number of opportunities you need to fill that pipeline, because the bigger the pipeline that can be in the early stage, the more flow through, the more velocity you're going to end up with. And so the question I always ask is, how much time do you, if you're doing this work as a founder or your sales team or your salesperson, how much time do you do every day prospecting? Because this is the heart of the revenue engine of your business. Victoria, you have a question.
Yes. So I'm wondering, based on your observation, the 3 to 5 times number, is it really just kind of because of the psychology, or just the way how it works, or is it just because in startup there's something different here, is that I think from the master class one, is that no, whatever, we supposed to solve a unmet needs. We're supposing to find the product market fit. So
Yeah.
Just to assume that, okay, we kind of get that, okay, this is a true unmet needs and this is a true product market fit, then we double down on the sales in that particular sector. Can we expect more or better?
No. Okay. You can't, because you're right. You're absolutely right. You're selling an unmet need, but you're also dealing with skepticism and concern and fear and risk in the marketplace. And so you might have like the perfect unmet need, but someone is thinking, but I've never heard of you, and I'm going to be the first one. And why would I solve a problem that no one else in the organization even knows that exists? And what if I take this risk to my boss and it fails? And so you have a lot of that skepticism going on inside the buyer's mind, which you have to battle against. Right. And it's not to say that you don't have answers to all those things. It just takes more time. So the reason for the 3 to 5 times is not even always because the other, 2 out of 3 are not going to buy. They're just might not buy now or in the way you think that they're going to buy. Right. So I was working with a startup a few years ago, and it was really interesting because we went out and we surveyed the market, and we had an unmet need with hospitals, and they loved this solution, right? They're like, this is perfect. If you can solve this problem for us, we will buy it. So that was great. Then when we went to market and there was dollars associated with it, and we had to go through the funding channels, and they realized how expensive it would be, they're like, whoa, well, we don't know if we want to spend that much, and that's going to take time. And oh, you know what? I don't have budget for it this year. It's going to have to go next year. That's going to require board approval. So while they did win a large number of deals, those deals took twice as long, and they moved into different fiscal years. So that's what's happening here. Rebecca, you've got a question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about how do we define, like, how do we qualify them as 3 to 5 times? So, is it just that they've clicked on something in our marketing, or are we putting them in that bucket, or do we have to actually have had a discussion of some sort with them?
Yeah.
How would you?
I think at this stage, you'd want to have at a minimum, and it will all again depend on how complex your sales cycle is, but at a minimum, you're going to want to have a conversation with them that's caused them to say, yes, I'd like to take the next step. So if they've clicked on marketing, if they've downloaded something, if they've come to a webinar or presentation, but you can't get them on the phone, then I wouldn't put them in this 3 to 5 times bucket yet.
Okay,
Now,
thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to also clarify, because I know some people have other ways that they're doing sales. In today's market, that conversation can also be a conversation over email in some cases, or a text chat, like a live chat. It doesn't have to necessarily be on the phone, the old-fashioned way. But if someone is engaging with you in email, asking questions, learning more, trying to set up meetings and things like that, depending on your market, you might also consider that a qualified lead. Was there another question? Sorry, I don't know. Your name comes up as Payal. Sorry, I was reading that as PayPal. I'm so sorry.
I know
Payal.
people do that. That's okay.
Payal, you have a question.
Yes. So just adding on to actually what Rebecca was asking. Now, for example, for us particularly, we are targeting the small business. And in my past life, I have dealt with large enterprises. Now, in large enterprises, we may define opportunity as a conversation, but maybe in a small business, it would be until we send a proposal, it's not a concrete opportunity. Do you think that would be right in terms of classifying the opportunities?
That sounds a little, to me, it sounds like either you're sending proposals too quickly, or maybe you could be adding them earlier. I'd have to dig into your sales process, but also, like, when you say small business, how are you defining that?
So we have our sweet spots in terms of verticals. Let's just say landscaping, for example. Any company that have less than 50 vehicles. They would definitely be less than 100 employees, or more so 50 employees, but less than 50 vehicles, because we're tracking
less than 50 vehicles. Okay. Yeah, I would probably work on your sales process so that you're either sending proposals, like you're qualifying opportunities a little deeper before you're sending proposals, and adding them to your pipeline. So if we think about a value-based sales process, and this is a simple one that everybody could use, that phase 1 qualify, which is, then this could take, honestly, depending on your business, this could take, 15 minutes to do, or it could take 15 days, right? Everyone's business is different here. But what you're really trying to understand, if you can have a conversation with a customer where you really understand the problem that you're trying to solve, or the gain that they're trying to, is this a gain you're creating or a problem? You can understand what they value. You can develop in your mind a hypothesis about the solution and position yourself as a subject matter expertise. And they say to you, yes, I'd like to have another meeting. That for me, or yes, I'd like to take the next step. That for me would be considered a qualified lead.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, if I just keep this slide up here for a minute, developing phase 2 then is simply developing that solution, right? And again, this could take multiple meetings to accomplish if you have to engage different stakeholders, decision makers, if you're building calculators or return on investment type strategies. Phase 3 might be simply present or propose. Phase 4, I always like to see this, is if they say yes, but you don't have a contract yet, if that's part of, if you need to then negotiate, having it in phase 4. And then of course that phase 5 is that final, we're onboarding them. I always like to have this final, the customer signed the contract, but we haven't actually received our cash yet phase. Because as founders, well, I mean, experienced businesses and founders, you need to understand if there's a breakdown between when the customer signs, you deliver the product, and they're satisfied. And so managing if there's a breakdown there, I think is really important. So super simple sales process. I mean, the vast majority of companies that I work with don't need anything more complicated than this. Yes, you will get a copy of this presentation. So absolutely. Any other questions? Okay. So let's take a look. I'm just going to, oops, I need to just minimize that. Let's take a quick look. We go back to this slide at, finding new opportunities. So first and foremost, when you're thinking about your sales team, your sales process, your structure, because prospecting is so important to your business, I really believe heavily, it's kind of old school, I realize, but of blocking time in everybody's calendars to do the hard work of prospecting. The vast majority of salespeople, I mean, 95% of salespeople, no matter what they say to you, don't like to do this work. I'm sure that many of you as founders also don't like to do this work. It can be uncomfortable or feel unnatural to call people who you don't know, who don't know you. Even if they've downloaded information, it can feel like we're interrupting them. We like to think if we build it, they will come, right? And so we'll talk to people who call us all day, but actually doing that hard work of digging and researching and prospecting is difficult. And so I think blocking that time every day is really important. For a full-time salesperson in your business today, if you have somebody, I believe if I was your sales VP, I would say no less than 2 hours per day, every day, simply built around prospecting. They can spend the other 6 hours of their day working on deals that are in the pipeline, following up, writing proposals. But I truly believe that 2 hours a day, if you can get people in the habit, and that doesn't have to be making cold calls. Don't get me wrong here, because sometimes cold calls aren't the right thing. It can be engaging with people on LinkedIn. It can be following up on people who showed up at a trade show booth. It can be following up on marketing leads. It can be asking your current customers for referrals or partners for referrals. So that 2 hours isn't spent just dialing, in the old-fashioned way, but it's really about digging in and putting new opportunities in the top end of that pipeline. It's through that base of broad base of opportunities that you as a founder are going to be able to test the rest of your sales process. But you can't tell me if you've got a closing problem or a pricing problem or an implementation problem or a value problem until you've got a critical mass of people that you're talking to, right? And after you've talked to multiple people and some have bought and some haven't, then we can start to analyze, okay, what needs to be fixed or refined, what markets are working best, what approaches are working best. So it really is the critical piece to building out your entire sales engine over the course of your life as a business. It's also the piece that shows investors that you got a healthy business, right? I mean, the more people that are interested and you're talking to that are, legitimate buyers, and the bigger that pipeline is, the healthier your business looks. Of course, the traditional ways of finding new opportunities, networking, conferences, partners, online research, resources, interviews, case studies, referrals, direct outreach. If you've put out research, making call, or if you're doing research or you want to do research, making calls to people to see if they're willing to participate in alpha studies or beta testing or research programs. Expert positioning and marketing, writing tip sheets, videos, how to, interviews with current customers in video or audio format. All of those kinds of things are going to be helpful in driving new opportunities. Any questions as we're going through? Oop, I don't see any.
I have one, Colleen.
Oh yeah,
Sophia, from Hope Pet Food. I'm
great.
trying to
Okay.
think about prospecting in our current sales model. So we
Yeah.
have a distributor
Great.
and they have access to like different accounts.
Yeah.
And what we're now trying to figure out is how to work with the distributor, like with and through their account managers. So it's and then reaching retail, and then we need to sell the product to the final customer,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So just thinking about that in terms of prospecting and just adding qualified opportunities to our pipeline, like how do you see that in these more
Yeah.
complex?
Okay, so I mean, there's a whole bunch of questions here. So you're asking me how to sell through your existing distributor as opposed to finding new distributors, right?
Yeah, I think
Okay, perfect.
that's what we are focusing
Okay,
on right now.
good.
Yeah.
No, I think that that's smart. So the one thing that you have to understand for all of you who are going to sell through any distribution channel is that these distributor sales reps have a huge portfolio of products, okay? And they get paid on all of them. And the most important thing for you to remember is they're going to sell what's easiest and fastest to get them paid, okay? So they operate a little bit more like catalog salespeople in that they will go without guidance from you. They will go into the pet food store, open up the catalog and say, what do you want? And the guy will point and they'll take their commission and they'll leave. Okay. So that it's just, and this is true if you're going to sell through CDW Gov or, Granger or any of those distributor. The other thing that's really important to pay attention to here is what I like to call, or I think what is called the recency effect, is whatever's top of mind for them is the thing they're likely to sell the most because it's top of mind. So if you've trained them or if you've just been in to work with them and they think about you guys more, then they're likely to sell. So one of the best ways to do this is to find opportunities to either be in their sales operation with them, to make joint sales calls. So I worked with a pet products manufacturer in Vancouver. They made leashes and dog coats and things like that. And they found they drove sales up the most when their sales reps rode along with the distributor. Right. And so it's a lot of legwork. I recognize that. But what's going to happen is that sales rep is going to hear from you, your passion, your sales pitch, your value. It's going to ingrain in them. They're going to watch you sell, help them earn a commission. And so then when they do it the next day on their own, it's going to be top of mind for them.
Okay. Thank you.
Sylvia.
Hi, I have a question similar sort of to that. So we have a channel and it's our sales channel that we're trying to tap into in a more meaningful way. And we do technology sales. So it's a data platform and our channel is Siemens. So similar to that,
Okay.
so I like the idea of, kind of being top of mind. What are some other strategies to be able to, again, for a startup that with limited funding that doesn't have accounts managers doing a lot of work, what would be the most meaningful way to spend the couple of hours a day to ensure we are top of mind for those individuals?
So you have, what's really important for you is to build individual one-on-one relationships with those sales reps inside Siemens who are going to be selling your material, because you do represent a risk for them. You have a fantastic solution, but again, you're a startup. They're managing monstrous clients that you want access to, and they're thinking to themselves, they'll make these calculations. Is it worth me, taking this to my client? What if the client what if the client doesn't want it? What if they get mad at me? What if it doesn't work? And so you have to work really hard on that front-end solution, front-end relationship with them to earn the trust and show them where you add value so that they'll want to bring you in. One of the ways you can do that, and again, this might feel like double work for you, but it works. It's highly effective, is for you to be looking for opportunities separate and bring them to Siemens. So you go out, you prospect, you find someone who's raised their hand, and then you go to Siemens and say, let's work on this together. I found it, they're interested, and I want to work on it with you. And then that way they start to trust you because they're seeing that you're working with them instead of against them.
Okay, yeah, no, and you know what, when so this was actually a true example. They had a very big client and they're like, we really want to work with you, but we need to find a smaller clients because of that, I guess, risk, and we are smaller, and
Yeah.
so, okay.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's nice. It's sort of nice that they told you that, so you can see that, because you have to recognize that these sales reps are saying to themselves, what's in it for me? I earn hundreds of thousands of dollars of commission with this client every single year, and I can't afford to screw it up. So it, you know, and then the nice thing about an account like this, and, you know, Sophia, in your case with a distributor, is once you get one of their sales reps who becomes a huge fan and has a success, they start bragging about it internally. And then everyone else on the team is like, well, how come that person is making more money and I'm not? Like, why are they bringing, their clients love them because they're bringing new solutions, and that's not happening to me. And so then they create this success internally. So that really is helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You know, selling through that distribution channel is a lot trickier for sure. But, you know, one of the other tools I thought was so interesting that a client of mine uses, because, you know, in some cases they don't even have CRM, right, is to actually build for their teams or their individuals, you know, or their business, a lead generation impact calculation. You know, this customer did the calculation and said everybody needs to add 5 opportunities per month to the pipeline in order for us to have a healthy piece of business. So they started tracking on an Excel spreadsheet, literally, you know, who had created what opportunities and were they ahead or behind the goal. And then below, in this case, they just did the calculation to say, okay, with this kind of shortfall, this was a startup in a distributor channel, so they had margin to play with. How much money are we losing as a team if we don't put these opportunities in the pipeline? Because, you know, your CRM won't necessarily tell you what you're losing as a result of inaction. It just tells you what you're going to gain as a result of what's in there today. And so this became a really great tool for the owners of the business to look at it and say, my God, by not creating 48 opportunities this year, we're losing, you know, $38,000 in profit. So making, you know, using tools like this can be really effective. And I'm happy to send you this spreadsheet. You guys can play with it as you want, just so you can understand the format. But, you know, in this case, with the inaction of their sales team in the first, you know, 10 months or 11 months of the year, it cost the business $192,000 in sales. And so, you know, that gives the sales manager and the owner something to go to the sales team with, especially if the, you know, the person's on commission, and say, like, guys, like, this is how much money we're losing by not doing the work. Sometimes your CRM, although they're fantastic, powerful tools, it doesn't show you this. It just shows you what you're going to gain based on what's in the opportunity. Any other questions about creating opportunities? Just, I want to talk about how to improve the quality of the opportunities next, if you guys are willing to move on. But if you have any other questions about sort of prospecting tools and things like that, we can. Yes, Yashel.
Yes, hi. My question is a little bit more elementary. We're not officially selling yet. So we're a healthcare product.
Okay.
Right now, with the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, they're supposed to be so it's a headset that uses EEG for diagnostic purposes. The issue that I sometimes run into is creating a good sales pitch, because well, our end user is the pediatrician that's going to be using the product, but the procurement team doesn't necessarily care about them being the end user. And then there's value being provided to the patient side, but then they don't necessarily care about that. So how would you, as a startup, limited resources, do I create separate pitches for each one of these? How am I interacting with them? If you could just give a few tips on that, that would be great.
Yeah. So, you know, this is a nice segue, actually, because this is what we were really going to be talking about, is what I call operationalizing value. Okay. Because in your case, and I'm sure others have this as well, you have multiple people, stakeholders, let's call it, in the organization who all have to come on side to say yes for this to work, right? And so a couple of things you need to do. Let me start by just pointing to some quick research from Gartner, because I think it's important to recognize that we're going to get the best quality of opportunities and get them closed faster by focusing on customer improvement and by being forward-looking. Now, in your case, it's going to be a combination of patient improvement or improved results from the hospital, but it also could be better quality work, if I could call it that, from the pediatricians, faster work, more accurate work, or maybe even the ability for others to be engaged in that work. So that forward looking is really important. And then, what we need to do, there's kind of a few things that we need to do here. It's an interesting model. I spend a lot of time in my life working in this. We need to think about value in this expanded way. So what I like to say is you have a primary value, but then there's expanded value inside the organization. And if you can say, here's why procurement should care about this. Here's why patient relations should care about this. Here's why community relations should care about this. Here's why nurses should care about this. Here's why the medical staff should care about this. Here's why, families should care about this. If you can take that primary value and expand it into all of those stakeholders, then you've got a value proposition that you can build questions from and develop statements from. So I like to, what I'm always looking for, and Victoria, you kind of raised this earlier when you talked about, an unmet need, right? So in your world, in all sales worlds, we never want to get into a conversation of apples to apples. Well, are you comparing apples to apples, right? You want to create this apples to oranges comparison. And one of the ways you're going to reduce risk in the sales cycle is by having conversations with people, both people who your competition isn't talking to, and on topics your competition isn't talking about. And so when that hospital says, my goodness, I see how your solution affects every single division inside our organization, it's going to make our labs operate better. It's going to make our technicians in the, on the equipment work better. It's going to make our community relations and our stakeholder, our patient relations happier. It's going to, reduce chances of mistakes and lawsuits. So, the legal department, and it's going to make procurement easier because of the way it, all of that is coming together. Then you become an operational solution as opposed to a point solution, which reduces the risk to the organization. So, it looks complicated, but it's actually pretty simple. The exercise that I would love for you guys to do is to take your primary value. So what is and many of you sent your value statements. Actually, why don't we just, oops, sorry, it's not in Excel, it's here. If I say, you help property owners optimize the resources needed to comply with operating regulations required to reduce risk and keep people and the property safe. Okay, so, in terms of the property owners, who inside the organization cares about that? Well, it could be the people who are buying the properties, people who are selling the properties, people who are managing the properties. It could be the owner of the property management business. It could be legal and compliance, right? Finance.
HR.
Oh yeah, HR. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it when you can bring HR into the picture, because if you can show, say through automation, that HR can hire less people, or that HR can reassign people to do their primary jobs instead of their secondary jobs, or that it will retain employees because they have a better workplace. I was working in the healthcare space, Michelle, with a startup. And one of the value propositions we realized, it was a patient scheduling and communication process, is that we could put nurses in the clinic back to the work of nursing instead of the administration and policing and calling about claims and calling about financing and having to do the intake form, which made them happier, more productive, and kept them in place. So that turnover they never thought about before, right? But that's what I mean by the expanded value. So capacity planning, the same thing, right? If you're saving planners 50% of their time so they can focus on other tasks, reduce the risk of errors, well, the legal department will care about that. The owners of the business will care about that because those planners can do twice as much work. And so it's a matter of asking yourself that question: who else cares and why should they care? Yeah, question, Yushel.
Yeah, just a follow-up question on the nursing example that you just shared with us. How do you go about capturing this insight? Do you have some processes in place to be able to pinpoint the additional value that you're bringing about? Is it on a regular, quarterly basis, et cetera? How do you manage all of this?
Well, I think it's two things. I mean, one, it's your smarts, right? I mean, you guys know, right? Like if you're selling, if you're selling an automated solution or something that's going to automate, you should know, just based on your own experience, that automation helps HR because it reduces recruiting. It in a manufacturing space, it reduces competitive strain injuries. It cuts back on workplace compensation. It helps in a legal way because I would imagine it reduces error. So what I would do is test those assumptions by then bringing it up and saying to, calling the hospital HR department and saying, I'm curious, we have a solution that's going to, reduce turnover and allow you to grow without hiring people. Has it been a struggle for you to hire people, right? What has your nurse turnover been like? I mean, I'm guessing you know that. I mean, it's been in the news for years, right? Or if you think you've got a solution to manage legal reviews more effectively in an area, or de-risk property management claims, calling some of those people that maybe your competition isn't calling on because they're not the buyers, and saying, like, we're working on this solution and our early indications are that it's going to reduce the risk associated with, and I'm curious, how are you guys currently managing that? Is this a problem for you? And gaining some data that way.
Thank you.
I cannot underestimate or understate the importance of broad stakeholder engagement inside an organization. We look at the data from multiple sources here, and in a typical company, of 100 people or more, there are up to 11 stakeholders engaged. Right. So, someone mentioned 50 trucks. So I would imagine if an organization has 50 trucks, they have close to 100 people. Maybe they only have 50 people, and maybe the number isn't 11. It could be 4, which is the rule of thumb that we work with. You guys probably know, because they have been a bit of a startup success in Ottawa, Ascent Compliance. I started working with Ascent years ago, long before they had any funding. And what we discovered is that if we got to 4 stakeholders inside the accounts they were selling to, we doubled the closing ratio. Closing ratio went from like 23% up to 42%. And we doubled the size of the deal. The deals went from, under 50K to over 100,000. And the renewal rates, because they were also a software as a service, or are like a SaaS, were 100% with just adding 4 people. So, that number is really critical. And I think in startups, a lot of times we make the mistake of going too narrow. All of you, well, I shouldn't say all of you, but many of you out of the 8 that responded when I asked if you had a target market or buying persona, I had yes or somewhat as the answers. What I would suggest is that if you are yes or somewhat, that now you look at all of those people and you make a commitment to say, who are the 4 stakeholders that we should be talking to in every one of these accounts or more? Sylvia.
So I have a question, and I think it is, so we have multiple stakeholders, and we have an enterprise account. And my question is more on the other flip side. I feel like I have met 25 different people from many different departments. And you know, our focus was like, okay, maybe this is too much, this is too big, because it takes so much energy from being able to really move the needle between legal and finance and products and our focus is sustainability, ESG compliance. So it really took quite a few folks, and then it sort of backed away. So is there something that is too big? And how did you navigate that?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, 25 sounds unmanageable, but it depends on the size of the deal. If it's a $25 million deal, then maybe not, right? So this is a space I know a little bit about, again, because of my work with Ascent. You know, I would say if you're selling an ESG solution, you know, legal has to be involved. If there's compliance or risk management on top of that, probably some kind of community and stakeholder relations if they have it, depending on the, you know, the sales team, because the sales team for whoever it is your client is probably intimately aware of ESG and what their clients are demanding, right?
Yeah, and they offer an ESG solution as well.
Yeah.
And they're global.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, there's going to be a combination of people. There is going to be the buyers, the people who can actually like write the checks, right? And I don't mean purchasing. I mean the person who actually gives the final yes, we're going to go ahead. Then there's the stakeholders, and so I think you would, in a case like that, I would ask your best contact, who are the key stakeholders? Who are the people we have to have around the table to all say yes, right? Who can say no? Who could get in the way? And just get that core group. And then know underneath them, you are going to have a lot of people, sometimes I call them spies, you know, chatterboxes, coaches, anti-coaches, people who are, you know, chipping away positively or negatively. And so you might have to influence or at least stay in communication with those broad brushstroke kind of people as well. But you're going to focus on those top group.
Okay, thank you.
Does that help? I mean, I know it's highly complex and it's hard to do in a big group like this, but
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I feel like it is with the bigger accounts, it is a little bit of mapping and figuring out who are the advocates and who are going to get you there. But sometimes it is with it's almost like enterprise sales, right? It just moves into a lot of time spent on understanding all the different folks and who really has the decision-making power.
Yeah, and that's the big key, is to find out the decision-making power and then the people that they're going to listen to, like who is that core committee. You know, there's lots of language you can put around this, you know, challenger sale, which is a really popular and great methodology. They talk about having mobilizers, people who can make it happen, talkers, the people who are influencers underneath them, and blockers. And who are the people that could put their foot down and say, no, we're not going to do this. I'm going to block you from that account because it's too important to me and I can't take the risk, or because I want to sell a different solution, or you're competitive, or my best friend works for the competition.
Right.
So those are the three key people I think that you would need to map there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that? So, you know, just to kind of circle back, one other thing on value that I'd really like you guys to consider, and again, I know you're in all different phases here, but to somebody's point, the more we can monetize this, whether it's, and it might not even be money so much as percentage improvements, the more we can add true numbers behind this, the better positioned you are to create that value, to improve the size, but also to get people interested. So even with your early stage customers, if you've got people who you're doing business with, but maybe they're not even paying you, maybe they're just beta testing, but they can point to a 3% improvement, or 26% improvement, or 26% savings, or a drop, in this case, return on investment, you can still say, even if they didn't pay you anything, like the solution cost $100,000 and they had a $200,000 return on investment, then that's worth talking about. I think it's really critical that we're measuring these things to be as tangible as possible, because people ultimately, in a marketplace where we are battling risk as one of your biggest obstacles, just the risk of being the first, the risk of being new, the risk of not knowing you, the risk of being a startup, the more tangible evidence that you can provide, the better quality opportunities and the bigger those opportunities will be. Questions or concerns with that? Rebecca.
I think for us is I agree with you. We don't have the real tangible numbers from customers as of yet, but I think we can hypothesize what those numbers would be, for example, in employee optimization and the like. And is that acceptable, do you think?
Well, what I would do is I would hypothesize and go to my, do you have a client?
Yeah.
And say, hey, this is what we think is happening. How do you feel about that? What do you think? Like, have you seen? And if they're like, oh, I don't know, we never measured it, then maybe talk to them about ways you can measure it. And if they say, yeah, that's exactly what we're seeing, or we're seeing better, then that's great. So I would go to the customer with your hypothesis and get them to share what they're actually seeing. Now, a lot of clients won't want you to use their name or be like, but you can do it anonymously anyways. It's still valuable, right? And use that as a selling proposition. By the way, if someone says to you, well, who else is using this and what results have they had? I'd say, as you know, we're a startup and our clients are sensitive about the data that they're holding because they're doing a lot of testing for us. So I have data, but right now I can't give you their name, and I would respect your privacy if we went forward as well. Great way to turn that into a selling proposition. Sylvia.
So we offer automation. So for our ROI, very often we quantify a number of hours saved, analyze hours of saved, cost savings, and we ran it by a couple of customers to be able to quantify it. Is there other, specifically when it comes to automation, is there other, and I just jotted down employee productivity, is there other specific metrics that might be relevant and are commonly used?
Yeah, with automation, if the work that they were doing before was kind of grunt work, like, employee satisfaction and turnover, and also you set up employee optimization. A lot of times what I'm finding with automation on software is the people who are doing the manual labor, they ended up there, but it wasn't their primary job. Right. For ESG, for example, it was lawyers. And now all of a sudden lawyers are having to do all this manual labor. And so they're not lawyering, which is what they love to do and what the firm gets best value from. So yes, you have employee optimization, but it also is the person being hired is doing the work that they're paid to be doing. So in this case, let's just use lawyers as an example. If as a result of an in-house counsel or person having to do manual labor, if that's causing your client to have to go and outsource legal because their lawyers are tapped out doing other stuff, then there's that cost as well. And then turnover is the big one. Okay. People leave jobs if they're not doing the work that people leave jobs that if they're doing work they don't find value in. And it's too much of an employee marketplace these days for you to be giving your employees low value work. Rebecca?
Yeah, so the other aspect of this for us is risk avoidance. So as an example, our goal is to help avoid slip and falls, to avoid, OSHA violations. So I can tout out, a willful OSHA violations, 135,000, slip and fall on average is $60,000. How do we use those within this ROI example? Because you're not really hopefully we're avoiding the risk, but you're not paying for the risk if the risk doesn't happen. So
Well, and you're selling in an environment where no one's going to want to admit that they had 5 OSHA violations last month, right? You can't go in and say, hey, so how many slip and falls did you have? They'd be like, I'm
Right.
not telling you that.
Yeah.
So I use that by asking them if they know what the cost would be, because most of the times they don't, right?
Okay.
So, have you done an analysis? You have 25 properties, and stats are that, one person per year per property slips and falls, and, we're in a litigious world, right? If
Right.
that happened to you, do you know how much that would cost you? That's the way I would look at it. So I would take the numbers and try to correlate. I'm sure the research exists that said how many of these typically an organization could experience in a year, so they don't have to admit whether they're better or worse.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Awesome. If we think about closing rates for a second. So, closing rates are something that we're constantly trying to tweak. You're never going to close 100%. Some of the best customers I work with get close to 50%. I think what's really important is that we want to be looking to aim our I'm comfortable with the business if we can get to 30, 35, 40%. At that point, I'm not necessarily trying to improve it because it becomes very difficult. There's better, easier ways to drive business than trying to drive a 50% closing ratio to 60%. But ways to improve it, so a couple of things. And I want to get at a core of them in a second. We'll run through these and then we'll take a break. I realize what time it is. So number one, make sure you're not sending proposals too soon. Okay. It's really critical. Just because a customer asks for a proposal doesn't mean they're ready for a proposal. So, build out a line of questioning that will make sure that you believe that the customer is ready to say yes or no when they get the proposal, not just compare it, and that you're sending it to the person who can make the decision. So, there have been oodles and oodles of books written about this. I'm looking at my bookshelf. My first book, Nonstop Sales Boom, has qualification on this, including lots of line of questioning, but just making sure that you understand who's going to make the decision, how they're going to make the decision, and if they're going to make the decision. So before you send that proposal, that sort of is that qualification and verifiers. Are you offering unique value? Yes, you are. Because to Victoria's point earlier, we're all in businesses where there's an unmet need. Are we talking to multiple people? So I get into the habit of telling my clients that they should never be sending proposals until they're talking to, 4 people. Now, the lady who is selling pet food, sorry, I can't remember your name, but you might be speaking not to 4 people, but you might have at least spoken to the maybe it's the store, the pet store manager, maybe there's a regional manager, and maybe there's your distributor. So maybe your distributor is talking to 4 people, but you need to really understand the broad perspective inside the account as opposed to just that single person. Now, if you're selling to micro businesses, which is why I was asking someone their definition, where there is only 2 people, then of course 4 doesn't matter. And then, of course, making sure you're asking for the business. So I've been involved with a lot of startups where founders and initial salespeople are just afraid to say, "Can we go ahead? Are you really, are you ready to move forward?" But the thing that I really want to dive into, and we can spend some time on this in more detail after the break, is recognizing that it's not just good. It's not good enough for us to just be good at the sales process with the person who can make the decision, because that person who can make the decision inside our account is doing a lot of other things that are influencing their ability to make a decision, because again, they're trying to assess the risk of moving forward with you. So they're researching independently. They're going online and looking you up. You know, they hang up the phone and they say, well, who is this company? Who is ScriptString, right? And if they can't find evidence of you, if they don't see that you're in the community, then they're like, maybe this is too big a risk. They're researching independently offline. They're in their communities. They're talking to their suppliers. Do you know these guys? What's going on? They're meeting with their buying groups internally or communities internally. What have you seen? What are you looking for? Do we really need this? You know, are these solutions? Are these problems that we have? And they're using their time to kind of formulate in their own mind, is it worth us moving forward? And they're looking at competitive solutions, right? So when I say 17% meeting with suppliers, they're not just talking to you. They're going back to their other partners and saying, well, don't you have a solution? We pay you so much already for consulting. Can't you just build us one? You know, they're going to their tech team, their purchasing team. Is it worth putting these guys on a supply agreement? Do we have another customer who offers this already? And they're meeting with those suppliers as well. So we have to pay attention to this from a sales and marketing perspective, because you as founders and your teams, sales and or marketing teams, have to be communicating broadly to your markets every single day, so that when you hang up the phone and your contact turns around everywhere, they see you. They see you online, they see you offline, they see you talking to partners, and they see you talking to other people inside the organization. It's the single greatest thing we can be doing to drive closing rates up, and also ultimately business in. So I do want to be cognizant of the fact that we've been sitting for about an hour and 40 minutes. Are there a couple of questions on this we can take, and then we'll take a break, and then I'll come back and dive into a little bit more detail?
Yep, let's take a break, folks.
Okay.
We're gonna take it for how 10 or 15 minutes, Colleen, based on how much time we've got left.
Whatever you guys think you need. What is normal?
Okay, well, it's changed each workshop. Let's take 10, and then we can let people out early if we end early. I think people
Okay.
time that way. If that
Okay,
works.
so sounds good. So Eastern time, 12:50, we will be back.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Victoria, thanks for your great questions.
Mhm.
We good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go.
Awesome. So I know we're covering a lot of ground. We're not, we're sort of going broader than deeper in some of the areas. And I did that on purpose, just because I wanted to make sure we covered this sort of cradle to grave, I guess, sales process for everybody, knowing you're all in different stages. And I really appreciate the questions as well as we're going through. So keep the questions coming. I just want to make sure I've got my chat up here as well. Because I was really struck by, for many of you, there's this balance between, finding all of the right opportunities and then getting them closed, right? So this strategy of, if we could call it, expert positioning or sales marketing, I don't know what we want to call it, influence, really does help you with both. When I think about my clients that are working with this model, what they're doing is they're spending a lot of time creating content. And I know that that's a really general term, right? But they're creating, and not huge white papers or even research papers. They create a lot of very short snippet content that can be broadcast across multiple social channels, including their own websites, multiple times a week. Because what they know is that people are searching. They're researching them after they leave meetings. They're searching for solutions. They're reading about industry information. And so they're putting themselves out there as the experts. As founders, I think, the more times you can be shooting videos, interviewing clients, if they'll allow you to do that, being on expert podcasts or speaking at conferences, producing webinars, interviewing, maybe if it's not clients, but other stakeholders or partners, distributors, writing, short snippets on how to, right? Top 10 reasons why, top 10 mistakes people make when choosing an ESG, how to know if you need an ESG, right? Solution. Why you should automate, why you should consider a healthy option for your dogs, those kinds of things. And you can just put it into small chunks and get it out there into whatever platforms your clients are participating on. Could be Facebook, LinkedIn, it could be X, it could be Instagram. The problem, it's both a blessing and a curse, I guess, is that we have so many options, right? You look at some of these options, and I'll use TikTok as an example, and think, oh, come on, like I don't need to be there. But like I would argue for those of you in in the retail sector, so that on the pet food, the dog food, yeah, you want to be all over TikTok, right? I don't know. I'm in the US right now, and I gotta just tell you, I think it's so funny because TikTok's running all of these ads from business owners about how TikTok is saving their business, TikTok for Business. Last night, while I was watching something, the TikTok for Business ad was about a nun, literally a nun who uses TikTok to like sell her products. I'm like, wow, it's crazy. And I've got clients who are huge. John Deere uses TikTok. I'm not a TikTok advocate for business necessarily, but I just think it's interesting because it's moved my attitude from, oh, that's so stupid, why would I do that, to, oh, well, if my clients are there, I guess I better pay attention to the media, right? For most of you, it's going to be LinkedIn. For some of you, it's going to be Facebook or Instagram or Threads. For a lot of you, it's also going to be X. But just making sure that you're putting the information out there. A narrower approach, of course, is to look at your association, the associations that your stakeholders belong to. So thinking outside of just the broad, big healthcare associations, where do the finance people in healthcare hang out? Are there smaller sub communities with patient relations or pediatricians that you should be paying attention to? Are there other suppliers who put out great information in terms of their own websites, blogs, newsletters that are not competitive that might also want to feature you guys? And getting the information out there broadly, what you're trying to do is create an environment where everybody in this wheel knows about you, hears about you, so that when your buyer says, hey, should we do this? They say, yeah, well, you should, because I see them everywhere. I know that that's a big, audacious vision for a startup, but that's the mindset that I need you guys to be thinking about, because not only is it going to make your sale easier, it's going to make attracting new customers easier everywhere down the line. Questions? Any questions? Okay, so let's go back to this sales process for a second. We've been talking about, we're spending a lot of time in this phase one qualify bucket, because ultimately you don't have what you need to develop a solution, a presentation, and obviously close if you don't get this phase right. In a sales cycle, when I analyze, good and bad deals, and we do win-loss ratios and try to figure out what's going on inside a pipeline, what we discover is that the best companies, the deals that are the biggest, that ultimately close the fastest, are those that spend 75% of the prospect lifecycle in phase one and phase two. So before the proposal goes out. So what that means is, if you, to make it simple, if it takes you 100 days to qualify, present, and close a customer, 75%, so 75 days, should be spending in this, hey, let's qualify to make sure that they're a good prospect, and let's develop a solution together. 25 days should be spent in, here's how much it's going to cost you to go ahead and why you should, and getting that closed. companies fail when they reverse that. So what this means is we do want to go slow up front in order to speed up the back end by digging into more questions, by finding more people to talking to, by really making sure the customer has a solution developed in their mind that they can take forward to get approval on. Pale.
So I had a question. So regarding this cycle,
Yeah.
And we may not be doing this right because we are also just learning, but from our experience, I noticed that for small businesses, we're often talking to the owner, who's the decision maker and is also the operator of the business. So send an email, we have a conversation, and pretty much in that we don't even have to go for a demonstration. Pretty much in that conversation, the owner is like, yeah, I think I like it, send me a proposal, and whenever he's ready to pay, it's done. So do you, in your experience, do small businesses also, would this apply, the 75%, 25% rule?
That's a good question. So when an owner says that so I have two questions. When an owner says that to you and you send a proposal, do they move forward?
Yes.
Okay, so you're winning them.
Yes. Our problem is reach. Our problem necessarily is not closing, it's the reach.
Okay. So my answer to you is yes and no, right? I don't want to argue with success, and I certainly don't want to create bureaucracy when you don't need it. And with those small businesses, the owner, and if you're getting to the owner and the owner sees value and is willing to pay, and they're staying with you,
yeah,
right? So that's, and you have high retention, then I would suggest that this phase 1 and 2 is probably needs to be combined and can be faster, right? You're still going through all these phases. It just might take you 1 day instead of 100 days, right? Because if you think about it, you're still on the phone, you're qualified, you're talking to an owner, you've identified pain or a problem, right? You've talked about the solution. So you're in phase 2, even if it's on the same call, you're sending them a proposal, and then whether there's a negotiation or not, or they just sign and move on.
Yeah, no, definitely negotiate. They act like consumers.
Yeah. So, the only thing you might want to consider thinking about in a small business environment like this, if you start to get pushback, is to ask a question like, is there anyone else in the organization we should involve? Like, do you have anyone else you rely on to give you some expertise? Is there anyone else we want to bounce this by? And I would encourage that, because they're going to say, yeah, we really should get the finance guy or the fleet manager or HR or whoever it is. And then that might help reduce some of the pushback that you're getting.
Okay. Understand. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I think what's really critical for many of you, though, you're selling in, if you're selling in bigger environments, is just making sure you understand why the customer would say yes, and this question of who else should be engaged, right? Who else opinion do you value inside the organization? Who else is going to want to have a say? Who else should be informed? Those kinds of questions, I think, are who else do you want to get involved, I think, are really important to be asking, so that you can develop this full solution. Because again, with a startup environment, the worst thing that can happen to you is you get someone who's excited, they decide to move forward, and then they get backlash inside the organization, which prevents you from rolling things out successfully, because someone internally doesn't like the solution, doesn't agree with the decision, had something else in mind, is fearful of a new implementation, doesn't know how to sell it, right? In a retail environment, they don't know how to, they haven't been well trained on how to sell the product to customers, or how to market it effectively, how to display it properly, all of those kinds of things. Okay. So we were talking about these market influencers, right? And I think when we think about this, the 4 that I would really encourage you guys to always be thinking about is, you've got this stakeholder, right? The person with the credit card, someone who can actually make the decision. It's money for them. You have all of the influencers, that they listen to. They listen to people inside their organization and outside, right? So those influencers, people who they rely on. We've got their stakeholders, the people whose work is going to be affected by this. So those would be, if I go back to the hospital example, or automation example, these are the people, not just whose work is going to be improved because you're automating or you're providing a better solution, but all those people around them who say, oh my God, thank God that doctor is happier now. He's likely to stay. I won't have to replace him, right? Or thank goodness that nurse is being optimized to do nursing, and not acting as the administration or intake to the clinic, because now we're getting better value for our money. And then, inside an organization, there's always people, I've heard these called anything from spies to coaches, blockers, people who can maybe don't want you to go forward, or people who love you and really want you to go forward and you're your champion, but they have no power. Or people sometimes inside organizations, especially when you're a startup, it's valuable to just have someone who will talk to you, even if they can't make a decision. Because, if they don't have any decision-making power, no risk to them, no skin in the game, they're often willing to give you information that maybe the higher ups aren't, right? And so you can use that strategically to understand the organization and phrase your value statements in language that people understand. Let's talk about this stakeholder engagement. Honestly, in my work with sales teams, what I have discovered is that if we can improve stakeholder engagement, and stakeholders being plural, it solves almost every sales problem. It solves the prospecting problem because you've got more people inside an organization that you're reaching out to, which helps Payal, with your problem of, just reach, right? Because we're not just trying to find owners, we're also writing so that fleet managers raise their hand and they can take us to owners. So we're broadening our reach there. It helps us with closing rates, because the more people you have engaged in the sales cycle, the more likely it is to close. It helps shorten the sales cycle. It also helps drive the value of the opportunity up, because we might be seeing a bigger and broader opportunity.
Yes, actually, that's so true, because ideally we would want to target 50 or around that number, but our average deal size right now is anywhere between 10 to 15 vehicles. So to your point, as we broaden the stakeholder, the deal value may go up.
Yeah, absolutely. And those bigger deals, like when you get into fleets. So I have a client that was selling to a monstrous fleet, Maple Construction, I think they're called, in Manitoba. They may be one of the biggest construction companies in Western Canada, and they have, I think, 500 fleet of 500. In those cases, they only got to the owner at the very end, right?
Yes.
They're working, they've got multiple fleet managers, right? They've got all of rolling stock fleet managers and stationary stock fleet managers, and and they're building a case. So when they finally get to the boardroom, the owner looks at all of these people and he's like, wow, you guys have been doing a lot of work. And finance is saying, this is how much it's going to save us. And HR is saying, and there's very little selling going, but they can't get that owner engagement until they have everyone else on board, because those people act kind of as, in a positive way, gatekeepers, right? They're not going to put you in front of an owner and fail. Because a fleet that size, you get one shot.
Yes.
So that's where social media is so important. It has been said, and I have no reason to dispute this number. In fact, I think it might even be low, that 75% of all people who make decisions in the US and Canada and North America are on LinkedIn. So, I'm surprised the number is as low as that. I think it's probably higher, but from a marketing perspective, huge bang for your buck. And the more you can be there, doing polls, engaging with your customers, engaging with with associations associated with your business, participating in questions that might get asked, running LinkedIn lives, participating in what your clients are doing, creating video content, audio content, and written content. The more you can be doing that and encouraging your whole company to be doing that, you, everyone involved in sales, everyone involved in marketing, the better. In fact, what I have found, let's say you've got a small business, it's maybe you don't have a sales team even. You've got some founders, maybe you have 1 or 2 people who are doing marketing, maybe you've got some developers and some finance people. If you can get them, I talk about this in one of my books as making everybody a profit center. Sorry, I had to think about what I said. Making everyone a profit center. Let's say you guys were all my team, right? You know, I'm the founder here, and I've got Payal as an engineer, and Katie, you're in finance, and Sophia, you know, you're working logistics, and Isan, you're, you know, a manager in the business. And I say, hey guys, I just posted something on LinkedIn about the business. I posted top 10 ways that you can help make your pet healthier and have your dog live longer. Every single one of you go to your page right now and share it. Every single one of you like it, comment it, and share it to your network. Oh, you don't have a network? Get your butt on LinkedIn, because you do now. Because the only way you can expand your reach is to expand your reach. Whether you have 2, 6, or 25 employees, every one of them needs to be this marketing center, because you have no idea. Like, Payal could be an engineer, but she could be a member of like 5 or 6 different, dog breed fanciers groups that are active on LinkedIn and have like, a huge network in the AKC championship. And all of a sudden somebody sees that I've got this new pet food, and it's like, oh, I wonder what that company is. And then, it trickles down. Whether we're big businesses or little businesses, we need to get that broad brush stroke out. And so every single person in your organization needs to be a profit center in that way. Did I see a question come through or a hand being raised?
Yeah, I had a little quick question. You kind of answered it in a way. But it's more in terms of, I mean, if you have one of your employees who just definitely, like, their audience does not align with the company's audience, is it still worth it in that sense for them to be promoting, or does it kind of water down the message over time?
No, on LinkedIn, it absolutely does. I don't, I'm not going to necessarily, unless you're on, retail market, I don't necessarily think that this is the case with Facebook. But on X, I'm still having a hard time saying that. On X and LinkedIn, absolutely. Because they might have a network that is like their friends and family, but you don't know who's following them. And you don't know actually where those people work. And you don't know what kind of influence they have in their sphere of work. So you might say to me, hey, yeah, my guy, they have all engineers, right? So like, why do engineers don't care about our stuff? But those engineers work for Siemens, and Siemens is a target customer of ours. And you have no idea if someone's going to get promoted or moved. So it really is this strange, not sure if any of you are old enough to have remembered the TV commercials from my youth, which were for a shampoo, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on and so on and so on and so on. And it filled the screen with just like little faces. That's kind of what's happening in LinkedIn. You end up with these incredibly indirect, but very powerful connections back to your business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you.
And I am not a LinkedIn expert, but I will tell you this as well. The other reason why it's so important is that the more a post is being shared and commented on, the more it gets, the more visibility it gets. And so the more people who are associated with your contacts will see it, which will then create more contacts. And so we need to keep the posts amplified by having people share them and use that. I did write a strategy about this. It's probably, it's on my website for sure, for free. You can look at, you can type in search terms such as the tempo triad, or you could probably do, even if you typed in LinkedIn or 3x3 or something like that. It's also in, I wrote a whole chapter on this in my newest book, Right on the Money, but there's a lot of free information on my website on it as well. So we need to get this prep work done. Obviously, we're going to be Googling, using websites. If you have budget for it, tools, the most powerful tool, if you've got budget to pay for a tool that I would recommend you use from a sales and marketing perspective, is called Zoom Info. Is there anyone on the call who's using Zoom Info? Payal, how are you using it?
So we recently, like just in early this month, we kind of finalized with Zoom Info. And today we're launching the campaign as we speak.
Oh, excellent.
So basically the way we're using it is we have these key verticals, and we want to have tailored messages sent through email campaigns through Zoom Info. We also invested in Zoho CRM because it was budget friendly.
Yeah.
So exporting the contacts into Zoho, sending the emails out, and then with the conversions and opens and clicks, then we will start doing the outreach through cold calling and having conversations.
Perfect. Okay. Excellent. So Zoom Info is not Zoom. Okay. We're in Zoom. Zoom Info is a completely different platform if you don't know. And it's, it's magic. They get contact information inside accounts for small businesses, big businesses, publicly traded and private company. And I have no idea where they get this contact info from, but it is highly accurate and all available. And so it is, and I have clients across all spectrums of businesses that use it really successfully. So, and it's legitimate. Don't worry. You're not like, people aren't being like, how did you get this info? So it is one thing that if you do have money to spend on a tool like this, I would highly recommend it, because from a reach perspective, if you're going to do any sort of marketing campaigns, outbound campaigns, if you've got target audiences that you are really going after, it's a great source of information that you can use. Short of that, LinkedIn is a fantastic and free source of information that you can be using to dig into all the detailed information about companies, employees. It just takes longer. That's all. Sylvia.
Just a quick question about Zoom Info. So we use Apollo IO, like for list building. Is that the same thing? Is it just mainly for list building and the contact information to, and then we use HubSpot. So we kind of have
HubSpot is great. My personal opinion, just based on experience, is that Apollo IO does not have quite the detailed contact information as Zoom does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
So just to add to that, just because Zoom was such a big investment for us, we kind of evaluated a lot of these sales intelligence tool, and Apollo was one of them. The difference that we found personally was more accuracy, more list, but also intent data, which was more accurate. So Zoom has bought, I don't know if you're familiar with this digital marketing tool. So they have bought this publisher engine. So when we go onto the website, we see certain ads based on our browsing history. So there's something in the back end, some intelligence that bidding on these cookies based on our profile. So they've bought a company that does it. So let's say if you go to New York Times and read an article on a certain topic, they know what you've read for how many hours, based on which they will tell you this is the intent of this person, and you should go and contact them. So that was very unique why we chose Zoom Info.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's good to know. Thank you.
Magic.
Magic.
I wish I had Zoom Info when I was starting. We barely had Google. But again, it is a big investment. So if you don't have that, LinkedIn is a great place. You can be looking for employees and just be following. What I would suggest where you start is, you go into LinkedIn, you have an you know who your target market is, you search for that company, And then you connect with multiple people inside that company, right? With a short little message of why you're connecting, not a sales message. And you don't send them anything that's salesy. You just have them in your network, and they'll, hopefully follow and connect you back so that you can see what they're posting, and you can reshare it if it's relevant, or you can comment on it or ask a question, and then they can start to see what you're posting. I am not suggesting that at this stage you connect with potential clients on LinkedIn and then immediately send them a, hey, can we meet? I have something to sell you. What I want you to do is build a network so that people are starting to see your content, and you're warming up the opportunity for then marketing, direct one-to-one marketing, be it email, phone calls, or later on a LinkedIn connection. Rebecca?
Oops, yeah, sorry. I'm interested in, so we've got a bunch of followers on LinkedIn. What is your recommendation for those followers and trying to build on that? Like, do we just, is it just our general posting and just trying to communicate that way, or should we be reaching out directly, do you think, to anyone who's followed us and trying, is that enough to initiate the conversation?
No, two things. One, I would make sure that you're posting at least every single day, so that they're seeing and they're hearing from you often, because the more you're posting, the more engaged that they're likely to be. And then I would look to see who's sharing your information. So you can get reports from LinkedIn that say, like, these people shared your information. And I would use that. I'm like, oh, hey, Rebecca, I noticed that you shared my article, or you shared my tips, and I'm curious, but what value you saw in that. That's the way I would do that. Or why, basically, why did you share it?
Okay.
And I would engage in the people who engage in my content. If people say, hey, this is really great content, thanks for sharing, this was really timely, appreciate this, then that's the one. Why did you appreciate this? Right? That's the way I would engage. But in order to create that kind of engagement, you're going to have to get at least daily content on the platform in various sources. Polls are a great one to use, and content. And then again, get your team. Everybody on your team has to like it, share it, comment on it to keep it active.
Okay.
Sylvia. Yeah, my pleasure.
So I have a question about sort of LinkedIn. So I know there is the marketing, building your network, and not necessarily selling, but from the sales side, from prospecting, you want to be, leading with value, short and sweet, and kind of getting to the point to have that conversation. So what would you say is the rule of thumb? Because I have, it's an experiment, I think. And I have tried both, where I am building a sales pipeline. I might be running a sales campaign, reach out to them on LinkedIn, and sometimes being more direct and just kind of following up. Hey, sent you an email here. It's more, I get more results being more direct versus great to connect, be part of your network, and more friendly of a message versus a direct, here's what I have, would you be interested, here's what we've done for other clients.
Yeah, so I think it depends on how established your network is, right? And how targeted your approach is. So if you're putting out a lot of content and people are getting value from what you're doing, and you have that content to be able to share in a direct LinkedIn message the way you would in an email, and it's one-on-one, right? I'm connecting with you because I see you are the VP of sales for X. We have a solution that can help your team. You've been a member of my community for a few months. Can we talk? That's that's great, right? If you're just reaching out to people and they haven't engaged, or there isn't that kind of connection, then that's where you start to lose people. So I think that it's really important to be building the relationship based on providing content and value first, and not reaching out to them with a hardcore, can we meet, within like the first day of them connecting with you.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously we want to do some prep work, with our network, who knows who. So I think some of you are in positions to have people refer, right? Which I think is really important. So getting referrals. And what I like to do with referrals is be, again, really direct. So I don't like the, who else do you know? Do you know any other, right? It becomes I'm going to talk to the CEO of this company. Can I tell him about our work together? Or, you're working with CHIO, so you've got an opportunity to talk to the Children's Hospital in Alberta, right? So, or in Edmonton. So can I tell them that we're working together? Can I tell them about the work that we're doing here, right? You could even be specific. Are there other pediatricians that you think would be interested in this solution? Or are there other, do you have other, but let's say, Sophia, on the pet food, you've got big stores like, PetSmart or those kind of Wrens, things like that. And then you got independents, right? So maybe if you're working with, I'm just thinking about Ottawa, there's a little company called Cricket & Co. Are there other independent pet food owners that you're working with that you think would be a good fit for our product, right? So trying to be really specific as opposed to being like, hey, who else can we sell to? If that makes sense. Rebecca, did you have another question, or is your hand? Oh, okay. I just wanted to make sure. So the pay line refers to this, and this is like a day-long topic all to itself, but I do want to put this sort of bug in your ear here. When you're selling a solution in a startup environment, right? You guys are all selling to businesses who are operating very successfully without you, right? Right? They're in business. They're doing a great job. In many cases, when you call, they might not even know that they may not be aware of the problem, or they may have been living with the problem for so long that they didn't even know that there was a solution for it, right? And so oftentimes the hurdle is not that they aren't interested, it's that because they didn't know you existed as a solution, they don't have any money for you. The budgets have been set, especially at this time of year, right? We're now in January. For most of your clients, it's the beginning of the fiscal year. And so they're like, well, this is great, but I got no money for it. We set our budgets in December. When someone says that to you, you know that you're below the pay line, right? Because there's two kinds of people in an organization. There's the person who looks at it and says, wow, this is so valuable. I know we didn't put a budget line item in it, but I'm going to find money to make it happen. I'm going to pull from Peter to pay Paul, so to speak. This is so important. I realize we can save money in HR by not hiring, by adding this solution. But those people are typically owners, executives, VPs, managing directors, partners, managers, sometimes directors or below are people who say, my budget is set, my priorities are set. If you're an IT solution, we've got my priorities are set for the year, and they can't veer away from that. So in any sales approach, what's really critical is that we're paying attention to that pay line and listening to what people are saying. If there are people who can make money happen and find money for a solution, even if it's not budgeted, then they sit above the pay line. If there are people who say, who their objection is, it's not in the budget this year, then those are people who are below the pay line, and it's a clear indication that we should be selling above them. Karen.
Yes, just a quick question. So in terms of if the people that are actually using your product or solution, because I have a SaaS solution, are what we consider the influencers, right? They're the ones that are gonna, they suffer the pain. We're trying to relieve their pain. They're not the decision makers. Those are above them. Even if the VP or the CFO says, sorry, not in the budget this year, so sad. It's the lower level people that are probably desperate to have that solution and have it included in the budget. Is it still worth it to continue to talk to them at that level so they can influence the higher ups rather than going straight to the top?
Well, I think it's both. So the reason why your CFO isn't saying yes, or the owners or whoever it is, because you on capacity planning, is because they don't see the return on investment, right? They just are like, those guys down there, they always want new things. They're just whining away and they just want new toys. They just need to do the jobs that we hired them to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's twofold. One, you need to build. So I'm just looking at your answer here. We save planners up to 50% of their time to focus on other tasks and reduce the risk of errors in their work.
Yeah.
Okay, huge, 50%, or up to 50%. So let's just even say 25%. So, and the planners know what that means to them, right? What could they do with 50% more time? What you need to do is go back to one of the earlier exercises and say, okay, if planners could do 50% more work, what would that mean to your business? Or if you could hire 50% less planners, what would that mean to your business? And that's the value that the CFO and the owners of the business, or the managing directors, or whoever those senior people are, will then use to make the assessment of, yeah, you know what, we're spending so much money in HR right now because finding people is hard, recruiting them is hard, the expense involved in paying placement agencies is high. What if we didn't have to hire 10 people, we could only hire 5, and we'd still be able to grow.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. You could also focus, in the errors. It's a slightly harder conversation to have because no one wants to admit how many errors are being made, right? But if you've got any data from clients that say, on average, it's not typical, or it's not atypical for a company to have 10% or errors, or 20%, and you can reduce that to 5, or you can cut that in half, or you can, reduce it by 10%, and that results in $500,000 more work or less repeat work, then again, that number is going to get the attention of those higher ups. Great question. Was there another one? So yeah, the key here, it really goes back to this exercise, that we talked about here. Who else cares and why do they care? I ran through this with a small and early stage company that I work with on the e-commerce identity set software, SaaS software business, because they just sell to the risk person, right? Or fraud, and whatever they call it. And I said, but think of all the other people that care about fraud inside that organization. I always default to the VP of sales because, they typically are type A and go in there with their fists pounding and say, we need this because we need more sales. If you could reduce the risk associated on an e-commerce platform of fraud, and bring in more good customers and stop the loss and the theft of your product, how much more money would that give the VP of sales, and would they be happy about that? And if we can get VP of sales on board, then that's great. So you're reframing the value. At the same time, VP of marketing. So when you send out a campaign, how much fraudulent activity do you get? Well, we basically 15% of our responses are fraudulent accounts or fraudulent credit cards. Okay, well, what if we could reduce that to 7%? How would that affect the success of your campaign? How does that help the payments manager, right? When you have credit card fraud, what does that do to your the relationship we have with the bank, chargebacks and all that kind of stuff? Well, it makes it more expensive for us to run credit cards. Okay, well, what if we could reduce that? So, in this case, we had I don't know what this is, more than 10. And the sales team hadn't thought about it that way. They hadn't thought, oh yeah, I guess, it's easy for technology to implement a SaaS solution. It's good for the director of payments, the general manager, or the store owner, or the e-commerce head, cares about it. Sales cares about it. And if we can make it broad like that, then it really becomes a no-brainer. So. We can just go right back here. I put engineers because I noticed that many of you guys were software there was a lot of software companies. And so, reaching out for introductions, again, making sure that if you've got engineers that you could be chatting with. And then, of course, cold outreach. It's not my favorite approach. And I think we could be warming up those leads through marketing and through LinkedIn. But ultimately, we got to pick up the phone and try calling some people as well. Sylvia.
So I have a question about the model from the prior slide, operationalizing value. And
yes.
when you kind of said, focus on the 4. And I feel like as this is one of the challenges, that there is so many different personas and you can reach them in different ways. And I think I've learned that from working with one of those enterprise prospects where it's sales, and it's pretty much the slide that you show for e-commerce. And I'm like, there is a value, like everybody has some skin in the game. So what's the best way to approach it? And where I'm thinking, and this is sort of what I've heard in the past, and I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but when you're trying to do sales and you're focusing on the top line, more growing profit versus saving money, what I've heard that if you focus on more on the sales approach and what it means and being able to attract those stakeholders, you are going to perhaps be more successful selling sort of growing revenue versus focusing, here is the efficiencies. What are your thoughts on that, and the best way to maybe kind of optimize that? Who do we sell to, and wearing sort of all these different personas and target the ones that I guess we can get more traction with.
So you raise a really interesting point. We talk about this a lot. So it is true that when you're talking, especially to executives, no one is going to admit to you that we've got efficiency problems or that our people aren't productive. They don't want to admit that there's problems or fraud or people are stealing from them. They're always going to say we have a revenue problem, right? If for no other reason than they know we're a salesperson and they don't want to be vulnerable in front of us. So that's true. The other thing that is true is people do like to talk about growth more than they do about problem solving. It's more exciting. And I think the third thing is when you do talk about revenue attraction or the revenue side of the business, you do build often a much bigger return on investment, right? That being said, there are people inside the organization who do care deeply about those problems, and they could be manifesting them in ways that your stakeholder isn't aware of, right? Turnover is one of the big ones, and the stress on HR. They're being pounded on to like hire more people, hire more people, hire more people. Can't you do your job? Why can't you do your job? Just hire more people. But they don't understand maybe some of the intricacies of the fact, well, we are hiring lots of people and then they're doing jobs that they're not paid to do and they're unhappy, right? The reason people are leaving is not because we have a terrible company. It's because they're being hired as a nurse and now they're doing secretarial work, right? They're undervalued. So I think it's a balance. I think at that most like senior executive point, you should be talking about that growth. And I also think that if you can get the sales and marketing teams engaged in that growth conversation, you'll get them on side, and they typically have a lot of sway inside that decision-making chain. At the same time, I would ask them, so other than just driving revenue, are there other issues going on in the customer or on site that you think we can solve with this solution? And should we engage in those conversations? And you might get things like, yeah, you know what? It would really be great for us if we could do this without having to hire 5 other salespeople. Or yeah, if we could reduce the amount of credit card fraud, our payments guys will be off my off my butt because I won't be driving up our credit card costs. And so then you can kind of add that on as a secondary value.
Okay. No, thank you. I think that's helpful. And I know I have sort of, just very recently, and I'll pass it on. I know everybody else has questions, but I did have had a conversation with a senior salesperson, and it's been a number of times where it's more about sort of definitely the roadblocks to the growth related to ESG,
Yeah.
data compliance, and things of that nature. So
Yeah, and you know,
Okay.
with the ESG, it is a huge roadblock for growth because it's a lot. I work with a large organization in the oil and gas space, and you know they've had to come up with like standardized ESG responses because they can't sell into certain clients without them, and without it, it becomes a roadblock. They realized that it was a selling roadblock, preventing them from moving forward inside certain industries, right? So that's a great solution.
Okay.
The other thing I just wanted to bring up on that, oh, just quickly, and then Yishel, I'll get to your question. We have in the past spent a lot of time in sales and developing value propositions around what's the problem we can solve, what's the pain. I think it's important for us to remember that we're selling to successful businesses, right? None of you are selling to businesses that are failing, because that's sort of a recipe for disaster, right? You're selling to businesses who are successful, and successful businesses want to get better. Sometimes people don't resonate with our value propositions because we go in assuming or making this broad statement that you have a problem that I can solve. If you can turn around that value statement and say, this is how we can make you better, you're already good. We're going to get you, make you better or make you great. Then people start to listen because that really is where they want to take the company. And so the exercise I encourage you to do here is to take these two questions. You can layer it on, you know, like create this for your own business and force yourself inside who we're selling to. Here's all the departments that customer has. You know, they have logistics and HR and sales and marketing and finance and operations and shipping and receiving and whatever all those departments are. And force you and your team to answer the question, why do those people care about my value proposition? Why does the accounting department care that we can make planners 50% more effective? Why does the business owner care? Why does marketing care? Why does sales care? And come up with an answer to that question. And that gives you this really broad, either growth or problem focused value. There was a question. Yishel, you had a question.
Yes, I do. It's follow up on Sylvia's question, but you've kind of already touched upon it already. But I'll ask it either way because so we're dealing with for example, when we're targeting hospitals, especially government funded hospitals like CHEO, we run into the same conundrum where they have not that they have a fixed budget, but they kind of do have that fixed for the year. So then increased revenue is not an incentivizing point for them. So I've been sitting with this for a while as to how, you know, we can say increased operational efficiency, but then that means more work for the doctors who are on a payroll. So doctors don't necessarily care about that. So how would you target such a situation?
Well, so, you know, I think I would have to look at what are some of the things preventing hospitals? So hospitals, you're right, it's not a revenue issue, right? But it's a patient satisfaction it's a combination. It's patient satisfaction. They don't want to be in the news because people are dying in waiting rooms, right? Especially children in this case. The other issue is managing the resources they have because they don't have necessarily the money to hire more doctors, nor necessarily are there more doctors or nurses to hire. Mm-hmm. So they have patient satisfaction and practitioner satisfaction. Like with my untrained brain on this says that one of the biggest challenges hospitals have right now are people just opting out of the profession. I quit. I'm done. It's too stressful. So rather than making doctors more efficient so that they can take on more load and do more work, maybe the message is around reducing the stress in the workplace for them by making it easier for them to do their jobs, giving them more time to talk to patients as opposed to analyzing charts, reducing the stress that they have on the risk of them doing something incorrectly. Because if they can retain those doctors for longer and keep them more satisfied, they become an employer of choice and they reduce their costs and their public discontent by having relaxed, non-stressed doctors that are sticking around for a long time. Sorry, and I'm just pontificating, but that's kind of the way I would start to tackle that with your messaging.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, because I guess the higher ups, this is what they care about. So it all begins with the psychology of understanding what is it that they care about, and then working your pitch into that.
Absolutely. And and you've got an interesting market because there are the government funded hospitals. I mean, ultimately there is going to be private, clinics and things that yet your product can go into. And then, you're going to want to eventually move into the American market, and that's just a whole other beast. Right? Rebecca?
Sure, I would build on that question because we have a really similar type of challenge in that, whether you're talking to executives or whether you're talking to even investors for that matter, people have taken for granted for so long how a property is managed from a safety perspective.
I bet.
That they're like, they don't understand, right? Like, I can't tell you, we've talked to VPs of operation, they're like, we don't have that problem. And then you talk to the next level down, they're like, oh my gosh, we have such a problem. So,
yeah.
Right. So they just don't have that visibility. And so I would be interested in your, what I mean? Like, so when I look at, so to this conversation, when we look at value of HR, I mean, there's terrible turnover of our front lines. We can't find enough time and resources, right? And we got legal is spending all this time trying to find data in order to defend lawsuits and blah, 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 blah. So, and then of course, from a facilities perspective, we make it easier for those people to do their job. We make it easier for middle management to push down the requirements and report up. So I wonder where we should should we be looking at doing for every message or not necessarily in the same message, but should we always be looking at, here's our executive message, here's our mid-management message, and then pushing out and just constantly be reiterating those three kinds of things or
yeah, it's yes and yes and so you're talking about nuanced messaging, which is so important. One of my clients the other day said to me, it's like languages, right? The executive speaking German, and the HR manager is speaking Japanese, and the person that you just described at the bottom is speaking Swahili, and they don't understand each other at all. And if I go in with a Swahili message up to the guy speaking German, he's going to be like, you need to talk to someone else because that's not what I care about, right?
Right.
Right. So there's this disconnect. So you absolutely have to think about. That's why I say, like, why does HR care about this? Well, HR cares about this because turnover and front lines and stress and it's not an absenteeism and all those kinds of things. So what's the value message that would cause an HR person to say, oh my gosh, I need you guys, let's talk. And then, at an executive level, what's the value message that they care about? And maybe it's around, I think property management, I feel like it's a lower margin business than, say, software as a service. So they're like, so the messaging there might have to move to how they can get more profit from their business, bring on more buildings, and manage it with fewer people, driving the profitability of that building up. I don't know what it looks like, but yes. So it's that. And at the same time, you need to be able to say, literally, like in a room full of people, here's what we do. And Mr. HR manager, this is why you should care about it. And facilities manager, this is how it's going to make your life better. And owner of a building, this is how it's going to make your life better. And legal, this is how you're going to make your life better. So that what you're doing there is you're sort of tailoring the value message so that it resonates with everyone, and they all go, oh, I see how this affects me personally.
Yeah.
Sylvia.
This is just a quick sort of message, I guess, for Rebecca. And I don't know exactly your solution, but incident management, it's part of ESG annual reporting too for those bigger organizations, because we've done an RFP. So if there is a reporting and monitoring component, I feel like it's kind of similar process that we've gone to. You have all these different personas that depending where really the sweet spot of your product is, you could be touching folks within the ESG community.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. It's actually one of our challenges is I think one of our strengths is the sheer flexibility of what we do. We can touch on every frontline department, right? In essence, if you need staff to physically do something, then we can make sure it happens, which is beautiful from a flexibility perspective. But then when you're trying to do do we want to talk about fire? Do we want to talk environmental? Do we want to talk health and safety? Do we want to talk, all of those things?
When you have a solution like that, it is important to find like the one area, right? To get it narrowed in. And then once you've got the person on board who really wants to talk about fire, then you could bring some other things up later to say, okay, should we talk about health and safety as well? Is that important? Is it someone else that we should get engaged, or should we just focus in this area, right? So you can go broad, but asking the question is so critical because, too many times we complicate the sales process by saying, well, we can do all these things as well, right?
Right.
It is.
Well, I know one of our other challenges, and I would think from an ESG perspective as well, is you've got risk management or even the environmental health and safety teams, but they don't actually manage the resources that would use our product. Right. So we've got to convince all these players that it's valuable for everybody.
Yeah. It's called tailoring for resonance. And it is a very advanced sales skill. But I think the most important part of it for you guys at this early stage that you're all in is really understanding. Stop thinking about value in this narrow scope and start thinking about, I like to call it operationalized value, right? How does the value that I bring affect everybody in the organization? And what's the single statement that I could use if I wanted to attract an HR manager or a business owner or a finance person? I think the one thing that's so important in selling today that may be even different from when I started, selling technology 30 years ago is that you never really know where your hit's going to come from. And while I understand and believe the concept of an ideal, a target market, right? You're not going to sell pet food to, a dry cleaner. Inside that store, the influence of all you need is somebody to put up their hand. They could be low, medium, or high, to the left or the right in terms of office space, in terms of where it is. It doesn't matter. That this concept of spending all of your time and energy only getting to that, top officer is not an effective way to sell today, because you're going to miss out on so many opportunities if you're not tailoring, if you're not, maybe off to the side here, getting an HR manager to raise a hand, or a VP of sales to say, that's a problem for us, or, a nurse at CHIO to say, you know what, I really think that we should be talking about this issue. That's going to be a great way to help build some reach. So, Payal, you talk about wanting to drive more throughput into your organization. Yes, continue to target fleet managers or fleet owners, but also start hitting messaging on fleet managers or drivers or or HR managers or other people in the organization who are affected by your solutions in a positive way. Because you never know, right? All it takes is one call, they're interested, and then you can work your magic.
Yeah.
Okay, so just in terms of, so do I have a book or a course to develop this skill set? Yeah, there's quite a few. So one that just came out, here, let me grab it off my shelf so that you can see it. It's not mine. I think it's fantastic. It's called The Jolt Effect. This is not a paid endorsement. But what I like about this book is it's all about overcoming customer indecision. Matt Dixon, who was the co-author, he had originally was the co-author on the Challenger sale, which is also a really fantastic book. So I would recommend that. A little bit more advanced. From a prospecting perspective, if you're really looking hard at how to fill the funnel, Some of the best work being done is by a gentleman in the US named Jeb, J-E-B, Blunt, B-L-O-U-N-T. He's got great books on prospecting, some of the best, really. And he also runs a company called Sales Gravy. They do a lot of online stuff, inexpensive, maybe even free. That's great. I've mentioned the 2 books that I wrote. Nonstop Sales Boom, which is a few years old now, is more focused on sort of the client, the life cycle, qualification, questions, negotiations, closing, that kind of stuff. The newer one, which came out a year or 2 ago, is more focused on building like some of the stuff we've been talking about in terms of building your frequency and reach inside a market. And it also, the whole second half is about sales velocity, building corporate internal velocity, and then your sales velocity metrics. There was one other one I wanted to mention. Oh, if you're interested in deeper work on LinkedIn, mastering the LinkedIn code. I can't think of her name, Melanie, maybe, but mastering the LinkedIn code is also fantastic. I would highly recommend that. Thanks, Katie, for sharing those. And if I think of any more, when I send the slides afterwards, I'll document them as well. So just as we're wrapping up here in terms of shortening the sales cycle, so if you're using a CRM, whether it's Zoho or the budget unfriendly Salesforce.com, which I do love, but it's expensive, really make sure everything is being entered. It's hard for you guys to manage the business and understand where the problems are and also some of the success points if you're not managing and tracking everything in the pipeline. Also know that you can't expect a sales cycle to go from 180 to 90 days overnight. If you're looking to try to drive a shorter sales cycle, pick a reasonable target and make sure that you create a baseline and track that from prospecting. The first place to start is to make sure that you or whoever is selling for you is actually asking for the business, because that's the biggest problem. We're not. Team selling, I think, is really important. If you're a founder who now has a team, you still should, or whether you have a manager or not, you should be team selling or co-selling with individuals. One, for you to make sure that you're still understanding what's going on. You're in an early stage. If you're trying to change markets or change anything, you should get some firsthand evidence. Plus, in a marketplace where people don't know you, and there's maybe a risk associated with doing business with someone new, the more people you put behind that relationship building, the less risky you appear. If I say, oh, wow, Zenelity cares about us so much that they've sent 4 people to this meeting, 2 things happen. 4 of them show up. So all of a sudden you've got a nice, good group of people, and they feel like you care enough about them that you're willing to invest, which makes them feel good about you, which decreases the risk of doing business with you. So in all environments, in all markets around the world that I have worked in, big and small companies, the more team selling that happens, so the more people you guys are including in the process, the shorter the sales cycle and the more likely the sale is to close in. So Katie, anything else we need to cover? I know we have 4 minutes left and a few people have had to jump off.
No, I think that was absolutely great. Obviously, lots of questions and lots of interaction. I'm taking notes as quick as I can to capture what you're sharing. But also, of course, we're going to have the recording of the session. I'll get to the founders right away, and then I'll get your resources post workshop too, Colleen. But yeah, this was fantastic. And Rebecca, again, is that hand up for a question, or you're just? No, okay. I do have so don't worry about it. But yeah, no, this was just wonderful. And thank you so much, Colleen, for giving us your time.
Yeah. Hey, my pleasure.
Yeah.
Any last questions or comments before we sign off for the day?
I just like to say thank you.
Oh, hey, my pleasure. Here's my contact info. I think Katie, you may have put it in the notes, but engageselling.com. I have a ton of free resources. So I publish, I don't know, two videos a week, I think, or maybe one video a week, an article once a month. We're on LinkedIn probably every day. If you want an example of, you know, how we're using those kinds of tools to attract business, you can copy the process there. A lot of free resources on my website, which you are welcome to. So if you want to sign up for those, or if you don't like to sign up for that kind of stuff, you can just stop by periodically and subscribe to any of our channels. LinkedIn, I think you'd find I'm most active on LinkedIn, and then Instagram and TikTok for video. So the videos go up on Facebook as well. I think they get published on X, but I'd have to ask my IT guy about that. I can't remember. And if you want the occasional rant, sales rant, TikTok is a good place to be, because that's the only place I experiment with stuff for fun. Awesome. I look forward to staying in touch. If you have any questions, I'm happy to help. Email is probably the best way to get a hold of me, and I'm more than happy to have a conversation or bounce ideas off of you guys. So looking forward to watching your success.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.
Soon all.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.